Hey, friend. So good to see you. Happy Wednesday. I hope this finds you doing well, doing great things, and officially kicking off the start to summer because it's June 4th, which I know is really hard to believe that we are already in June. I don't know about you, but Q1 and Q2 have just whizzed by me. It has just gone by so fast. I know you are so busy, so I'm so happy that Jeff and Valerie and Nikki and Gil and Shelby and Giacomo and Isabel, so many good people can be with us today. If you are joining us live, which is pretty fun, you can kind of see that over here, the chat is sort of where the magic happens. You might be thinking you join this session to sit back and learn a lot of tips and tactics from Dr. Emily. And that's true. You will learn a lot of tips and tactics from Dr. Emily, maybe even me, who knows? But really, you're also going to learn from everybody else who's joining today, because this is a session where you get to lean forward, get those fingers typing, and share your tips, your tricks, your tactics, things that work for you, and also any questions that you have that have been popping up for you. If you are listening to this later as you walk the dog or fold the laundry or do the dishes, never fear. Hopefully, someone is sharing some ESP with you and will ask the exact question that you too were thinking. But if not, you can always hit me or Dr. Emily up on any of your favorite social media channel, and we can help answer your question afterwards if we didn't get to it. But I have a feeling we're going to be asking a lot of good questions. Selfishly, I have a lot of good questions. So I also hope that you brought your own really good questions to today's session. And if you're just kind of getting caught up, I wanted to give a little bit of background on why I'm so excited about Dr. Emily to join us today. And that is because every year around this time, June, I start to go into summer mode in my own brain. We don't have kids yet. Apparently, I still think I'm a kid because I go into summer vacation mode. I'm like, oh, June, July, August, no work. Spoiler alert, there is work. There's actually lots of work to do. But in my mind, the weather's nice and I don't know, I'm not motivated to work. I'm motivated to take a walk or go to the lake in Austin and hang out. And so a couple weeks ago, I knew this was coming. Sort of like you anticipate Christmas. I like anticipate that the summer is hard for me to focus and sit down and do my work. And so I started searching preemptively ways to battle that because I know that that is coming. And spoiler alert, it is indeed here. Can confirm. So in my wanderings, I wandered onto LinkedIn Learning and found Dr. Emily. I really just kind of went down the rabbit hole all around her concepts of kind of going to the mental gym and really focusing on kind of how you can focus, setting yourself up in a productive way to focus, how it's different for each person. Anyways, went down the rabbit hole. And then, as always, I figured if I was having trouble with this, focusing and summer and kind of doing that mental work, then perhaps you also were suffering with this right along with me. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Emily to our chat to dive in.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. Like I said, I feel like I've watched hours of your face, but now having you actually live, I'm like, oh, you're real. You're a real person.
Yeah, it's really nice to actually get to have live interactions. I've done a lot of podcasts recently. That's always wonderful. But there's something just so cool about seeing the chat, people from all over the place. I went to school in Michigan, so go blue to those Michigan folks.
I love that. I feel like we have lots of people who are like, oh my gosh, hi, I've seen you before. So I love seeing that. But I was wondering just from like a macro view, obviously there's tons of content and people that kind of go deep on mindfulness or meditation or self-awareness or communication. And I'm just curious, like how you really narrowed in on this kind of niche subject area, because there was a lot of different directions that you can go. And obviously you're qualified to kind of speak in a lot of these different areas. So what kind of helped narrow your focus?
Well, I grew up in Silicon Valley, and when I was doing my training for clinical psychology, I was doing that in the Bay Area. And so a lot of the people I was naturally training with and on were entrepreneurs. My family is in tech, my community is in tech. And so I was exposed to a lot of people who were high performing, successful individuals. And what I found was that they often didn't feel like they fit into this dichotomy of being either mentally ill or mentally healthy. There was something in between where they wanted to understand how to level up their emotional life. And so I wanted to do a research project that explored what a more proactive approach to emotional health looks like. And so what I did was I interviewed 100 psychologists and 100 entrepreneurs. And I asked them the question, how would you know if you were sitting across the table from an emotionally healthy person? And in specifically an emotionally healthy leader? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And out of this research came what I call the 7 traits of emotional fitness. These are the 7 things that emotionally healthy leaders and people are working on all the time. And those 7 things are mindfulness, curiosity, self-awareness, resilience, empathy, communication, and playfulness. And so a lot of my work has been dedicated to helping people do their emotional push-ups in those 7 areas and become emotionally strong before things get really bad so that they can actually prevent emotional health issues.
And I'm curious, like, what do you think people struggle with the most when it comes to those emotional push-ups?
What do people struggle with the most? I think just having it be part of your everyday routine. When you think about someone who doesn't do a lot of physical fitness and then they think, you know what, I want to get more physically fit. One of the hardest parts is just motivating yourself to start every day, to just get up and go for a walk, to do 10 jumping jacks, to do a few push-ups. That starting part can be really hard. But once you are on a roll, once you have it as part of your routine, not only does it get easier over time, but it has all of these incredible rippling benefits. So part of my work is trying to give people really tactical exercises that they can do to start this routine right away. I'm sure we'll be talking about some of that today.
Yeah, I forget I watched like multiple of your LinkedIn learning courses, so I forget which one this came from. But one of the things that I really love that you talked about is twofold. One, setting yourself up for focused work by understanding the ways in which you focus. And I think you gave yourself as an example that, you work well in 15-minute increments, and you work well when you have a snack, and you work well when you're, in comfortable clothes. So really kind of setting yourself up for that deep, meaningful work. But more so, I really was curious about that second layer, which is knowing yourself, like know thyself, of how you get that deep, meaningful work done. So I'm just curious, like, how can people start to discover that about themselves and really help set themselves up for success?
Sure. So I'll give another little piece of my background, which is I have raging ADHD. I've had it my whole life. I was diagnosed as a kid. My parents put me on meds really young, and I hated the way the meds made me feel. And so I started secretly flushing them down the toilet. But I realized that if they realized I was doing that, I would, I'd have my cover blown. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to need to find some other way to change the things that they're telling me are problematic. And so I started doing little experiments on myself to figure out how I could focus better. And I got to the point where I realized that if I can adjust my work and learning environment to the way my brain works instead of the other way around, instead of trying to change who I am, that was actually a lot easier to do. So then I went to grad school and I did my doctoral dissertation on ADHD and success without the use of medication. And I'll say I'm not against medication. I just don't think it should be our first line of defense. And I talked to all of these incredibly successful adults who had ADHD, who actually felt like their ADHD helped them be successful. And what my research ultimately showed was that the stigmas people face for learning differently are often more harmful to them than the symptoms of ADHD itself. So you asked about how I started to learn how to focus. Well, I started really young doing these experiments on myself. So for those of you who want to figure out what your ideal focus environment is, treat it like an experiment. Set yourself up in different environments and try to read a boring article and see what kind of environment allows you to stay present the longest. I did a test on myself where I set a timer and I started to read something that I did not find interesting. And then as soon as I found my mind wandering, I stopped the timer. And what I noticed after doing this for many trials is that I can only focus for about 10 minutes on something that's not interesting before my mind wanders. So now I never expect myself to focus for more than 10 minutes without a quick brain break, without a bite of a snack, or I get up and walk around real quick, or I scroll my phone for 2 minutes, and then I go back in and do another 10 minutes. So that was one of the experiments I did on myself. So that's what I really want to encourage people to do, is treat your mind like this incredible thing that you can understand better. And then you can start setting things up to support how your brain works.
What have you found is sort of the most challenging thing for people when they're trying to set themselves up for success? Like, is there a universal speed bump or roadblock that you found that a lot of people end up hitting?
I don't know if there's a universal speed bump because we all have really unique struggles. I think the most common thing is that people just give up on themselves too quickly. You know, this is really hard work. When you're first starting something that you're not used to doing, it's uncomfortable, and we're not good at sitting with our discomfort. And so I think what I want to remind people is we sometimes forget that as adults, that when you practice something, you will get better at it. You know, we kind of know that as kids because we're learning everything. But as adults, we forget that if you're not naturally good at something, but you practice, you will improve at it. And that might be a skill, but that might also be just, for example, experimenting on yourself. Maybe at first it doesn't come naturally to you, but if you make it a part of your routine, it will become more easy to do. So I would actually throw a question to the audience really quick. I'm curious for everyone, what is one condition that needs to be present for you to lock into good focus? Do you need to be in a comfortable chair? Does it need to be silent? Or does there need to be background noise? Do you have to have the right pen? Do you need to have someone else working nearby? What is one thing for you that needs to be present in order for you to lock in with really good focus? So that's something I would be curious about.
Yeah, I would love to hear everybody's answers too, but I want to second this point that Jeff made is really, getting comfortable with that discomfort. So doing these experiments on yourself, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if you're like, why am I reading this boring book? Just, because Dr. Emily told me to see like how long I could do it for, doing that sort of uncomfortable mini experiments on yourselves is where the growth happens. But looks like we got a lot of people saying silence or maybe some light music in the background, but a lot of silence, a lot of like absolute quiet.
Yeah, and I'm the opposite. I cannot work in silence. I need the stimulation of background noise. So I work better at a cafe or in an office or somewhere where there's a little bit going on. I'll put on a TV show I've seen 1,000 times in the background. But knowing this about yourself is the first step, because now when you need to drop into focus, don't try to drop into focus in an environment that is the exact opposite of what you know you need to focus. Then you're just going to feel like there's something wrong with you and that you're not doing a good job. And really, it's just that you haven't set yourself up for success. So figure out what all these things are. And in my LinkedIn course about focus, I go through a whole bunch of different things that you should set up for your environment to figure out what really makes sense for you. Lighting, noise, location, are there people there? All kinds of things like that. So the more you know, the easier it will be.
And I will also just build upon that and say that, I think all of us have worked either with teams or group projects before, and that we know if we come to a situation grumpy or angry or kind of a little short, that perhaps we are not creating the best group environment or team environment because, Kim came to the marketing meeting hangry, and now everyone is feeling the effects of that. And so, I think knowing yourself can also help, give some good self-awareness and emotional awareness for that group work as well. Because I also feel like, you talk a lot about the role that feedback plays in the work, which I also think is really important.
Oh, for sure. Feedback is so key because there is a lot you don't know about yourself. So studies actually show that about 95% of people would say that they are self-aware, but that only 10 to 15% of people actually qualify as being self-aware. And the reason there's such a big discrepancy here is you know everything you do know about yourself, which is a lot, And you also probably see things that other people don't seem to know about themselves. And so, in comparison, it feels like you are more self aware. But what you don't realize is that there are things that other people can see that you don't know about yourself. And that's why feedback is so powerful. Most people are not going to tell you what they think about you until you ask. And so, asking for feedback regularly and often can be a really powerful practice. And one of the emotional push ups I talk about in my book is everyone should send a text to someone in their life. And I actually do this once a month. Send a text to someone in your life that says, hey, I'm working on asking for feedback and I'm curious, would you share one thing I'm doing well as a friend, a boss, a colleague, a sibling, a mom, anything? And will you also share one thing that I could do 10% better? And I love this phrasing 10% better. It feels like a lower lift. And you might be really surprised at what comes back in these text messages, both the positive and the constructive. So this is one of the emotional fitness practices that I have as a regular part of my routine.
And who are you sending that text to? Is it friends? Is it family? Is it work colleagues? Is it clients? Who are those
All of
texts
the
going
above.
to?
All of the above,
Everybody.
for sure. Yeah. I'll ask my sister, I'll ask my partner, I'll ask a coworker, I'll ask a friend. It'll be a different person each month for me, but it should really be anyone that you interact with regularly whose perspective you respect. You don't need to ask for feedback from someone who you feel like doesn't see you in a fair light, although sometimes we can learn things from that too. But just ongoing regular feedback, really powerful.
Well, and I feel like, feedback and that sort of self-awareness piece is really the foundation of your book. So for anybody that doesn't know, a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Emily released a book, Flex Your Feelings, which is awesome. And, that is really that's what I gathered was it's the foundational starting point of that. And so I'm curious for somebody who maybe is working remotely or is working from home or is kind of a solo entrepreneur or more of a consultant, if they don't have a lot of places to get that sort of immediate everyday feedback that you would in like a corporate space, or 3 days a week you're going into the office, but then 2 days a week you're working from home, what are some strategies that you've given either entrepreneurs or consultants who might just be, or I guess remote corporate workers who are working from home and thus don't have that in-person feedback as frequently?
Right. And it doesn't have to be in person. I mean, the way we interact with online, that's something that's helpful to know too. But then you might decide to turn to the people you do see in person more, which are your friends, your family, your partner. I will sometimes ask feedback from people that I've had one interaction with. So actually recently, I did an interview with someone and she was such an incredible interviewer. It just felt like she really knew what she was doing and she had really done her research. And so afterwards, I took the opportunity to give her a little bit of feedback, to just tell her what I thought she did so well. And then I said, and will you indulge me? Would you tell me what is one thing that you think went really well in this interview? And what's one thing I could do 10% better as an interviewee? And, she might have been a little caught off guard, but she ended up giving me incredibly helpful feedback. So it can really come from anyone and anywhere. But one thing I'd maybe add is journaling is almost a way of giving yourself feedback because you are tracking how you feel over time. I have a 1 line a day journal. I just write 1 line every day about how I'm feeling that day. And I've noticed that I start to almost learn things about myself by noticing the patterns over time. So I've been keeping this 1 line a day journal for 5 years. So I know how I have felt on this day for 5 years in a row. And I have really started to notice, wow, in the spring, I'm a lot more creative. Maybe I should start projects in the spring more. Or in the fall, right before Thanksgiving, I start to feel a little anxious when I'm going to see my whole family. That's interesting. That's something I should maybe pay attention to. And so journaling is almost this little view inside your own mind that can be really helpful.
No, I feel like that's such a good hack for somebody who hears the word journaling and thinks like, oh, like I don't have 15 minutes a day to like write down everything that happened that day.
Totally.
That 1 line is everyone has time for 1 line. That's not anything too crazy. I want to get to this question from Darius because I think it's really interesting. He says, Dr. Emily, Do you deal with time blindness? I don't know much about ADHD, but I have heard that term before. Interesting question, Darius.
I've heard this term before as well, and I've heard it correlated with ADHD, and I've heard that it can correlate with all kinds of things like people who are late a lot, or people who lose track of time, or, there's all kinds of things that this can look like. I will say I'm kind of a unique case because I have almost developed these very intense, structured ways of managing my ADHD, and paying very close attention to time is one of the ways I've dealt with it. And one of my best friends is my phone alarm. I set alarms for everything. I set alarms to set alarms. I literally will set an alarm that says, don't forget to set an alarm for these other things next week. And this is one of the ways that I keep my inability to kind of hold on to time in that same way in check, because it is true that when I'm really excited about something, I will hyper focus on it and I will completely forget that anything else exists. And all of a sudden I will look up and hours will have gone by and I will have created all of these things that I didn't even realize I was able to do. And so I have learned how to mitigate these things for myself. But I would be curious to hear from the audience too. What does this look like for you? How have you dealt with it? I always love to crowdsource one of these kind of situations.
I also am a big fan of my phone alarm. What I've started to do, I don't know if anybody else struggles with this, but sometimes at night, I don't know, I start watching a show or I start reading my book, and all of a sudden it's like, 11:15 p.m. and I'm knees deep into like Onyx Storm and, my dragon books. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to go to sleep 45 minutes ago. So I started to set alarms at 9:30, 9:45, and 10 p.m. And then 9:30 is like, start winding it down, whatever it is you're doing, like put the book down, put the TV show down. 9:45 is like, you better have put that book down right now. And then the 10 o'clock is like, you better have brushed your teeth and at least be in bed. And so that's like my own kind of version of that. But similarly to what you said before, Dr. Emily, I mean, I found that through trial and error. Like me telling myself, go to sleep at 10 p.m. wasn't working. I wasn't listening to myself. So had to run this little experiment. And this is, this 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock is kind of the alarm system experience that worked for me.
For sure. And I love that you did tiny experiments on yourself to figure that out. And we all have that capacity, which is cool. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about the ADHD, and I want to just share that the sort of 3-step system I have learned for managing my ADHD without meds is step 1 has been processing the trauma of being told my whole life that I learn and work the wrong way. That is the thing that my research showed can be really problematic, is people end up having these ideas about themselves that they're not capable, they're not worthy of being taught. And that's one of the things we have to process through. Step 2 is mitigating the problematic symptoms. And I do that through setting alarms. I do that through having accountability buddies, people who check in on me for things or who I work with, all the things I do to deal with the negative aspects of ADHD. And then step 3 is setting myself up to make use of the superpowers of ADHD. I am good at multitasking. I can hyper-focus when I really care about something. And so I made sure that my job allowed for these kinds of things and that I could lean into those things as a positive superpower. So I think that this 3-step system can kind of work for anything. We should process the emotional side of it. We should figure out mitigating ways to deal with the tough stuff. And then we should celebrate and set ourselves up for success around the superpowers of things.
Well, and I just want to point out and raise the top what Liz just said, which I think sometimes we can feel alone in this, but Liz says, I struggle so much with time. I'm terrible at knowing how long something will take me, especially when it comes to work tasks. I never give myself enough time. And honestly, Liz, I feel like this is one of those things that I feel like everybody struggles with. I know that that's very much a blanket term, but I'm just thinking of myself, and whether it's my husband or some of my closest friends, whether they're entrepreneurs or working corporate, everybody thinks, oh yeah, I'll finish that in 5 minutes. Or like, oh yeah, no, like that'll take me 10 minutes. And like, it never does, ever.
Totally.
So it feels like this is kind of a universal problem.
It is. And again, it's one that can be really helped by a little experimentation. So Liz and everyone who I see agreeing, take the next time you have a task, time it and write it down somewhere. And then the next time you have that task, time it again and write that down somewhere. And then after you've done this kind of task a few times, average it out. And you now have a sense of how long this task will take you. And so the next time you have to do it, set an alarm that gives you that much time to do that task. Obviously there are all kinds of factors that change things. If I'm in a good mood, I'm going to be more productive than if I'm in a bad mood, etc. But for the most part, we can gather so much data about ourselves and how our mind works that can help us put ourselves in the right position later. Like, I'm such a procrastinator. This is one thing that's very common with people with ADHD, but all kinds of people. I need the anxiety of an impending deadline to focus. If I have too much time, I'm just not going to be productive. And what I create is not going to be my best work, actually. And there are all kinds of people out there who will tell you that you shouldn't procrastinate. And I say, no, I disagree. If procrastinating is the way your mind works, just learn how to procrastinate more effectively. And the way you procrastinate effectively is that you get really honest with yourself about how much time something's going to take. And you make sure that you give yourself that much time to do it. So you just don't want to procrastinate more than is actually realistic to get things done. But these days, if I had something due a month from now that I know is going to take me about 3 days of work, I don't even pretend to think about it until 3 days before it's due. And I make sure that I have those 3 days free to do the work. Maybe what I'll do when I get the assignment is I'll create the Google Doc so that it feels like I've already started. That's one thing that can help me. So then it's like, look, I've already started this work. I just go into the Google Doc. But that is what has worked for me. And I'd be curious from the other procrastinators, do you also realize that maybe you just need that anxiety? Kim, I see your reaction. Are you in this camp?
Okay, no, but I'm glad you brought this up because I always want to make sure we get to other people's questions, but to be honest, I always want to ask my own questions. And this is one of my own questions because this is my husband. What you have described perfectly is my husband to a T, capital T. And I am the opposite. I was the goody two shoes. I was teacher's pet in school who was I finished the homework assignment 2 days early. Ding. And that was me, classic. And so my husband and I have this, we don't want to call it fighting, but we want to call it monumental difference in how we live. Yeah. So things where, for instance, we know that Christmas comes every year in December. We have been together for 9 years. In November, it is a scramble. Do we have flights home for Christmas? No, why not? Because in his mind, until it's 3 weeks before Christmas, we don't have to think about that. Whereas in my mind, I'm but then the flights are more expensive. Now we're paying more money because we didn't book the flights in June when I wanted to book the flights. So my question for you is, I guess on a personal level, but also this could be true in teams. If you're on a marketing team and you're a wait till the last minute-er and the other person on the marketing team is a do it now-er, how can we work together? How can we all find a kumbaya middle ground?
I so empathize with you, first of all, because I am a procrastinator and I have many people in my life who are do-aheaders, as I call it. And one of the things to realize is that it's just a difference in how the mind works. Kim, I think that people who work like you do get anxious if you don't start the work. If Correct. You are sitting around not starting, then you feel anxious, and that anxiety is paralyzing and makes it harder to do the work. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Okay. On the other side of the spectrum is people like me, where we need the anxiety to do the work. Without the anxiety, it is impossible to do the work because the anxiety is stimulation, it's motivation, it's energy. It is what makes us kick into gear. And so finding a middle ground often looks like perhaps making agreements about what will happen and by when. Because if there is a deadline, even if that deadline is not at the last minute, then the impending deadline will cause that anxiety. So you and your husband might have a deal where you say, okay, look, the lights can go up at the last minute. That's fine. But I do think we're losing a lot of money by not booking flights until December. So I think from now on that we should have a deal that flights are booked by November 1st. No matter what, flights are booked by November 1st. And if we book them by November 1st, we get to upgrade ourselves to a nice little extra meal on the trip, or you can put some kind of positive motivation. If we don't book them by November 1st, then every day after November 1st that it takes you, you have to put $10 into this jar or whatever you want to do. Now November 1st becomes a deadline. And as you approach that deadline, that same anxiety will kick into gear. So sometimes just creating deadlines for yourself and holding yourself accountable to them can be really helpful. And then this is a place where just empathy is so important, that I think often people believe that procrastinators are just lazy or don't care. They don't think it's important. They don't think it's a priority. And I think that on the other side, people can think, oh, how you described it, a goody two shoes. But that's not true. That's just how you need to do your work, because the anxiety is paralyzing for you. So empathy on both sides is so huge. Being able to say, babe, I know that your mind doesn't kick into gear without a deadline, so let's set some up. I want to set us up for some success. And him being able to say, thank you for being able to do these things in a way that I'm not. I appreciate you, might make you feel less frustrated about it. So that is my suggestion. But of course, let's crowdsource if anyone else has found ways to help kind of see across the aisle of work style. That's always helpful.
Well, and I'm glad that Giacomo brought this up, because I think this happens a lot on teams at work, where people just have different ways of working, different ways of doing deep work. I know you talked about a lot in your LinkedIn Learning course. Some people work better in the morning, some people work better at night. But again, when we're all on the same, whatever it is, marketing team, sales team, tech team, whatever it is, you do have to somewhat get all on the same page. So I love Giacomo's question here. How can you best manage your attention if you're focused on something, maybe you're in charge of the team or you're a group project leader, but you keep receiving kind of messages and questions and pings as you're trying to do this focused deep work that needs to get done?
Great question. Communication is everything here, and there are a lot of different types of communication that you can do. So one of them is as simple as just treating your calendar as a really important tool and resource. If you need focused heads down time, if you're the kind of person who, when you're in the zone and someone pings you, it ruins everything, you need to have signals that show people that you're in the zone, because they might not know that. So you might have blocks on your calendar that say heads down, do not disturb time. You might have emojis on your Slack away message, like the little headphones emoji or something. And if you're in person, you might all agree as a group that if headphones are on, it means do not disturb. So having these signals, having these ways of communicating things to people are really important. And then blocking off time to support other people so they're not wondering when you're going to get around to it. So your calendar might say 9 to 10 heads down time, 10 to 11 office hours. And office hours are like, come one, come all, whatever questions you have, whatever you need help with, I'm here for it. You can pull my mind in different directions. But when you see heads down time, I need that to be silent. I need that to be just me and my work. So really, communication is everything. And I find that when people know what's expected and needed, they will rise to that occasion.
Well, and I think exactly, because you're setting up those boundaries and you're setting up those barriers, which I think is really, really important. I wanted to bring this up because as I was kind of going, down the rabbit hole of your LinkedIn Learning courses and your content, one piece that was also in the book that I found really interesting and surprising, and I don't know if you've gotten this before, but it caught me out of left field, was you talk about playfulness. And I don't know why, but that really struck me as I just wasn't expecting that. Like I was kind of, okay, we're talking about focus and we're talking about being mindful and we're talking about like optimizing our brains and then all of a sudden like playfulness, I was like, wait, what? So I'm just curious, like how did you decide to like orient that into the work that you've been doing?
I love your reaction, because I kind of had the same reaction, but this came from the research. This was one of the things that emotionally healthy people prioritize. And I think we forget how important play is. We think play is something for kids, or it's something we only do when we have extra time. But there's so much research that shows that play increases productivity, increases creativity, it improves collaboration. And I even read one study that showed that people who play regularly live longer by a significant number of years than people who don't play regularly. That's how important it is to our well-being. And when I'm talking about play, I'm not necessarily talking about just sports games or board games or video games. I'm talking about the improv definition of play, which is saying yes and. It means when someone comes to you with an idea, you meet them in that idea, you expand on that idea, and together you get somewhere that neither of you could have gotten alone. So brainstorming is a type of play, or taking a joke too far with a friend is a type of play. Anything that focuses a little less on the end goal for a second and a little more on the journey and the process is playfulness. And so this is so important for really anything that we want to get done. And if you think about how powerful a strategy it is to gamify something, like think of all of the things that are designed to gamify a product. You know, really like social media is gamified by giving you little wins and streaks and all kinds of things there. So we can gamify our focus. Yes, exactly. Yes, we can gamify our focus. We can gamify our learning, and it will help us lean into it more and be more productive. So that'd be another thing, Liz. I'm curious, like, what role does play have in your life and your learning and your focus? I'd really want to know.
Yeah, I'm curious too, because for somebody that maybe is joining us today and is kind of thinking, I know what Dr. Emily is saying is important. I know that I should kind of make my work a little more playful or, introduce that, but I just feel stuck. Like I'm kind of like I'm out of practice. What are, I guess, some low-hanging fruit or some easy tasks that someone could leave this session today and say, okay, I'm at least going to try implementing, these one or two things to kind of reintroduce play into my life?
For sure. So one of them is start your meetings with an icebreaker question or a game. And this is something I can help with. I actually created a handbook of games and a list of my 30 favorite unconventional icebreaker questions. Anyone who wants either of those, reach out to me on LinkedIn. My handle is at Dr. Emily Anhalt. I will send you those. And so just start your meetings with a quick icebreaker question. It can be as simple as that. Or the next time someone comes to you with an idea and you find yourself wanting to say, yes, but we tried that already. Yes, but it might not work because of this. Instead, challenge yourself to say yes and find a way to build on that idea. Even if you don't agree with it, just see where it goes. You might say, well, yes, and if that were true, then what if this other thing were true? Or what if we tried XYZ? Yes, and someone today. And in and of itself, that is a playful way of being.
I love this. And Liz got back to you and said, I probably don't play enough, but I can see the benefits. I feel like you're really in the present when you play, which is always a good thing. And that's such a good point to bring up, Liz, because I think to Dr. Emily's point of kind of doing the yes and, we all, by the way, not you, we all have the tendency that as somebody is talking, I'll use myself as an example. If somebody is talking and they're telling me an idea that in my mind, I already know like that idea is not going to work. Instead of listening to them, I'm already coming up with my answer of why their idea or whatever is garbage and not going to work. But what that does is that doesn't allow, maybe within that garbage pile, there is a gem or two of something that we can like pick out and unkernel, but I'm not going to find that diamond in the rough if I am already, I've stopped listening, basically. I've stopped listening. Whereas with the yes and, you can't stop listening because you need to pay attention to everything that they say. So I think staying present in a moment is so important to this.
I was so thoughtful and self-aware that you even realize that you're doing that. And that's the first step. It's hard to change something before we know it exists. So now that you know that, you might just challenge yourself. As soon as I start to feel myself checking out, I'm going to click back into yes and mode. The thing about play is we also only play in spaces where we feel safe. So for people who feel like their work environments are not playful, it often points to the idea that people don't feel like it's safe to be playful. They don't feel like they can try on ideas. They feel like there'll be consequences if they make mistakes, or that people will shoot them down or not yes and them. And so the safer and more collaborative and playful we make spaces, the better they are in every respect.
Absolutely. No, I feel like that is just such a good I want to bring up, Kathy said, a great recommendation to connect with someone about playful learning is the fantastic Katie Piot from the University of Sussex. Never heard of Katie, but super interesting. Thanks for sharing
That's awesome.
that, Kathy.
For sure.
Speaking of, interesting people or content, I'm curious for you. I mean, obviously you know a lot of other like-minded, doctors or teachers in this space. Are there any accounts on social media or on LinkedIn that you really enjoy learning from, or you really enjoy kind of consuming their content or podcast or newsletter or whatever form it comes in?
Yeah, I love this question because I've thought about how there are people on LinkedIn that I feel like have devoted their entire careers to helping people with each of these traits. So, for example, if you want more playfulness in your life, find Gary Ware, W-A-R-E. He is literally all about making work more playful. If you want to learn how to be more empathetic, check out Sharon Steed, S-T-E-E-D. She talks all about empathy at work in this really incredible way. There are all kinds of people that have devoted themselves to these different things. And I also try to make sure that I have psychologists in my feed who are not invested in necessarily becoming thought leaders or getting so many likes or whatever. They just want to impart incredible information. One of those people that I really respect, his name is Jonathan Shedler, Shedler. He's incredible. So those are just three that come top of mind.
I love that. I'm curious, as you start to learn about your own focus style, how can people think about their focus style when it comes to learning? So I say that because I have a friend, we were actually just getting in this discussion recently where she said, I can no longer read books. Like I have to listen to them. She's like, I've just found that like when I listen to like my Audible books or my Libby books, I retain so much more than when I physically have a book and I am reading it. And I was like, wow, I am the complete opposite. Like I can listen to funsy books, but I cannot, if it's like a dense book that I need to like really kind of take away a learning from, I need it in my hands. And so I'm curious for you, like how can people, I guess, realize content wise or entertainment wise, how they're absorbing the best?
Yeah, great question, because I also have more trouble reading than I used to. And honestly, a lot of it is that we all have these little dopamine machines in our pocket, these rectangles that are just ruling our lives that make it feel like it's so much harder to focus. And so one thing I recommend doing is a dopamine fast every once in a while. Spend a weekend without your phone. One thing you can do is go somewhere where you can give the front desk number to your family in case they need to reach you. But other than that, you are not on your phone. Be away from all of the things that normally give you cheap dopamine, like sugar and television and scrolling. And remind yourself what it feels like to get well-earned dopamine, which comes from being in nature and exercising and, all kinds of actual connection with other people in ourselves. So I recommend doing that every once in a while. All that said, whatever works, do it. If you listen to audiobooks better and that's how you retain information, then great. And in fact, there are a lot of websites that will help you get audiobooks for textbooks. For example, if you're a college student and you don't read as easily as you listen, there are websites where you can get textbooks read to you, things like that. If you're a person who needs to actually read it, then, have a Kindle that always has a few books loaded up for you, that kind of thing. Like lean into your style. That's really the premise of my whole course on learning and attention, is that we often fight our style, whether we're procrastinators or we prefer audiobooks or we need silence or whatever it is. And instead, what if you let it be okay that your mind works the way it does? And what if you saw that as a beautiful thing and you set conditions up for yourself to make use of that style? Oh, I suddenly can't hear you, Kim. No, I can't hear.
Oh, maybe now.
Yes, you're back. You're back.
Might sound a little weird, but we're going to give it a go. No, what I was saying was I love this point from James. When I go camping with the kids, we leave phones in the car. A weekend of just nature and great memories. So exactly what Dr. Emily was just talking about is really doing a fast from that dopamine, whatever that looks like, whether it's camping or maybe just, I know this sounds crazy, but like no phones at the dinner table. That's like one of my biggest arguments.
Or after 10 p.m. even, I love that.
No, it's one of those things where it's just like, just don't do it. Just you're thinking about it, just move away. Just whatever you do, just don't do it. I love this point too about Jeff saying, really focusing on different learning styles, focusing on how you yourself can get better. I just think that that's really, figuring out what's going to work best. And it feels like a lot of people in the chat are kind of saying, oh, I'm figuring out like where I read books best or how I read books best. And I feel like that's the type of work that is just so powerful.
I love that. Let's celebrate it.
1,000%. Okay. Dr. Olney, around these parts, we're sort of super nerds. So I loved your homework assignment of trying out a yes and in our everyday lives. But I'm curious if you could give us another homework assignment. It could be to read something or do something or listen to something or download something, whatever it is. What is a good homework assignment that you would give us? I will also plug another homework assignment, which is your book is amazing, whether you read it physically or listen to it. That is another great one. And we're going to drop a link, not only in the show notes, but in the chat so that people can pick that up. But what is a good homework assignment that you think will just kind of help people level up their game?
Well, the homework assignment I want to give is maybe a little less directly about becoming more productive or effective, and a little more about reconnecting to your presence and joy, because a lot of focus is just about reminding ourselves to be in the present moment. And so one of the things that I try to do once a week is I go for a walk in my city and I pretend I'm a tourist. And I go to a different neighborhood in the city and I have my podcast in my headphones or some music. And I pretend like I'm seeing this all for the first time. And I notice all of the wonderful, beautiful, present things about this place that is so easy to take for granted. And if I find myself wandering, if my mind is wandering, I use it almost as a meditation and I bring myself back to what's right in front of me, what is right around me. So it's sort of like a walking meditation in a way. So find your own version of a moving meditation. What is something that you can do to help you stay in the present moment? That's the homework assignment I would give. And I hope that people will let me know how it goes. Find me on LinkedIn or any of the socials. Let's connect. If you grab a copy of my book, I'd love to know what I did well and what I could do 10% better. And Kim, I'm so grateful for you and these incredible conversations you put together. And it's so cool seeing how much your community values this space. So thank you so much for having me and flexing your feels with me.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Like I said, I've been so looking forward to this, especially after consuming so many hours of your content. Like I was like, oh, you get to talk back now. This is so fun. I love this. Like I said, I highly recommend that people do what I did, which is go down the Dr. Emily rabbit hole, because there's tons of good content out there. I know you have the book, you have your LinkedIn learning courses. Where should somebody start? If someone is like, oh my gosh, where along the kind of rabbit hole of all things Dr. Emily, where's a good entry point?
I'm a big fan of the social media follow because I'm just dropping little things every day. It's like a little push up every day. So whether you're an Instagram person, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, I'm on all the things. My handle on all the things is at Dr. Emily Anhalt. Find me there and let's connect. And I'm just so excited to break an emotional sweat with each of you.
I love that. I love a good analogy. I'm a sucker for a good analogy. So an emotional sweat is something I can totally get into. And I know that so many people in the chat right now are like, oh my gosh, thank you. And Valerie's even like, when are you coming back? I know the 45 minutes just flies by, especially when Dr. Emily is dropping so many gems on us. So yeah, we'll have to, if you send her enough messages begging her to come back, perhaps we will sway her. But thank you so much for your time today. This has been just really fun. And I just so appreciate all the wonderful learnings and tidbits that you brought to the conversation, because I know I have a lot of homework to do after this in the best way possible.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. You're such a gem. And I look forward to, I'll come back anytime you'll have me.
Oh, I love that. And we just want to thank you guys for staying in this with us and asking such good questions and kind of popping off in the chat. We really had so much fun during this conversation. I know you are busy, so the fact that you took time out of your day to join us means the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Like I said, we are here every single Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can always sign up for sessions. We even have a little calendar alarm, like Dr. Emily said, that will go off so you don't miss a session. You can sign up for that on getcoffeewithkim.com. But we have a lot of good conversations coming up in the next couple weeks that I'm really stoked on. So I hope that everybody has a beautiful rest of the week and that you get back to Dr. Emily and I soon about your homework assignments. Until I see you next week, take care.